The night the blizzard swallowed the city was the kind of night people later described with shaking voices, the kind that rewrote memories and rearranged lives, and it began with a single terrifying image that no parent ever wants to imagine, a small child vanishing into a wall of white while the world stood frozen and helpless. Snow fell like it had a purpose, sharp and relentless, wind screaming through empty streets, streetlights flickering as if even electricity was afraid to stay alive, and somewhere between abandoned storefronts and buried sidewalks, a biker's daughter disappeared into the storm while her father was still minutes away, unaware that fate was already testing how much a human heart could endure. Before this story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this deserve to travel far beyond one screen and one night. The homeless teen at the center of this story was named Lucas Miller, 17 years old, invisible to most people, a boy whose life had quietly unraveled long before the snow ever began to fall, a boy who slept behind a boarded-up library wrapped in donated blankets that never fully blocked the cold, who survived on day-old bread, soup kitchen leftovers, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when the world had clearly given up on him. Lucas had once been an honor student, the kind teachers pointed to with pride, but after his mother died from an untreated illness and his father disappeared under the weight of addiction, the system swallowed him whole, moving him from one temporary place to another until there was nowhere left to go, and by the time winter arrived, the streets were the only place that felt honest. That night, Lucas was scavenging for cardboard to insulate his sleeping spot when he heard a sound that cut through the storm, not loud, not dramatic, but wrong, a thin cry that didn't belong to the wind, and instinct pulled him forward even as fear told him to turn back. The child he found was Emily Carter, 8 years old, bundled in a pink coat now crusted with ice, her small boots already soaked, cheeks burning red while her body shook violently, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when a child realizes adults are no longer nearby, and behind her, tire tracks half buried by snow hinted at a sudden stop and a moment of chaos that had sent her running in the wrong direction. Lucas didn't know her name then, didn't know her father was Daniel Carter, a heavily tattooed biker known across the county for his rough edges and fierce loyalty, a man who led rides for charity yet frightened strangers with his size and scars, but none of that mattered in the storm, because cold doesn't care who you are, and neither does fear. Lucas wrapped his own threadbare jacket around Emily, ignoring the way his fingers went numb instantly, lifting her because she was already too weak to walk, pushing forward against the wind toward the only shelter he knew, the abandoned library whose broken back door he'd learned to wedge shut against the night. Every step felt like punishment, snow climbing past his ankles, legs burning, lungs aching, but Lucas kept moving because he understood something many people never learn, that when you have nothing, protecting someone else can feel like the only thing that gives you worth. Inside the library, the air was barely warmer, but it was dry, and Lucas used his body to block drafts, rubbing Emily's hands, breathing warmth into her fingers, counting her breaths, remembering fragments of first aid lessons from a school life that felt like it belonged to someone else, fighting panic when her shivering slowed in a way that scared him more than when it had been violent. Outside, Daniel Carter arrived at the place where his world had cracked open, his motorcycle skidding slightly as he jumped off, shouting Emily's name into the storm until his throat burned, guilt crushing him because he had only stepped away for a moment to help another driver, because he had assumed his daughter would stay put, because every what-if became a knife. Police searched methodically, volunteers combed streets, headlights sliced through snow, but the storm erased tracks as quickly as they were made, and time moved with cruel indifference while Lucas sat awake all night, afraid to sleep, afraid Emily wouldn't wake up, afraid he wouldn't be enough. Morning came pale and exhausted, the storm finally loosening its grip, and it was a volunteer searcher who noticed the faint smoke from a makeshift fire pit behind the library, who pushed the door open and froze at the sight of a teenage boy curled around a child like a shield, his lips blue, his eyes sunken, but his arms locked tight. Paramedics rushed in, voices urgent, blankets everywhere, and when Daniel arrived moments later, his heart nearly stopped when he saw Emily alive, weak but breathing, reaching for him as relief collapsed him to his knees, tears cutting clean paths through the dirt on his face. What shocked everyone wasn't just that Emily had survived the night, but that the boy who saved her nearly didn't, Lucas's body shutting down from hypothermia as the adrenaline finally faded, his quiet bravery almost costing him his life. In the hospital, while Emily slept under warm lights and steady monitors, Daniel learned Lucas's name, his story, the way he'd given everything without hesitation, and something shifted inside a man who had always believed the world was divided into strong and weak, because here was strength he hadn't recognized, raw and selfless, hiding in plain sight. News spread quickly, headlines flashing across local screens, strangers leaving notes, donations pouring in, but Lucas woke confused, embarrassed by attention, unsure why anyone suddenly cared, and when Daniel sat beside his bed, a giant of a man struggling to find words, gratitude filled the room heavier than any speech, a promise forming that this wouldn't be the end of Lucas being seen. Over the following weeks, as Emily recovered fully, laughing again, returning to school with a story she would carry forever, Daniel kept his word, helping Lucas get proper shelter, counseling, a chance to finish school, using his connections not as a biker but as a father who had learned humility the hard way. Lucas struggled with trust, with the fear that kindness was temporary, that stability could vanish like footprints in snow, but slowly, painfully, he allowed himself to believe that his life could be more than survival. He enrolled in classes, worked part-time at a garage Daniel recommended him to, hands learning honest labor, confidence growing with every small success, and the library where he'd nearly frozen became a place he volunteered at once it reopened, helping other teens who felt forgotten, because he knew exactly how invisibility felt. Years later, people would still talk about the blizzard, about the biker's daughter and the homeless teen, but what stayed with those who truly listened wasn't the storm, it was the reminder that heroism doesn't announce itself with uniforms or titles, that sometimes it wears worn-out shoes and sleeps behind locked doors, waiting for a moment when someone else needs them more than they need themselves. And if this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can change the direction of a life in a single night, please take a moment now to like this video, share it, and support the channel, because your engagement helps stories like Lucas and Emily's reach people who may be standing at their own breaking point. Before we end, I want to ask you one more thing. Leave a comment telling us what part of this story moved you the most, because your words matter more than you know, and somewhere out there, someone reading them might find the courage to step forward into the storm and become someone else's miracle.